Hello, my name is Andy, and I will be discussing the Module 4 video post question about non-compete clauses in coaching contracts, and if it's more practical to stipulate that a coach cannot go to another team within the same division or conference, what the organization is trying to accomplish there, and if it's going to be effective. And so, overall, yes, I do think it's more practical to include that in the coaching contracts, and I will discuss that later on in the video. And so, according to the text, it is very common for coaches to try to upgrade their coaching status and go to a more prestigious university. You see this a lot within Power 5 schools, a lot. Almost every single year you see an example of this somewhere. So the first case I want to kind of highlight and cover here for an example of non-compete clauses and how it works in court is Northeastern versus Brown. And in this case, Brown had a contract with Northeastern, and he had a restricted covenant clause stating that he's not allowed to talk to other colleges about employment without written permission from Northeastern. And so he did this, and he talked to UMass, and he ended up coaching for them, and they sued, Northeastern sued, claiming that in Article 7 of his coaching contract, it specifically told him that he couldn't do that and that he breached that contract. So the court upheld this and ruled in favor of Northeastern. And so Brown, he was allowed to continue employment at UMass, but UMass had to settle for $150,000 with Northeastern, and Brown had to sit out the first 3 games of the following football season. And so this is a good example of the remedies that courts will allow or award for a breach of a restricted covenant clause within a contract. The next example I want to go over is Marist v. Brady, and how this one, even though they did rule in favor of Marist, there weren't any damages awarded. And so this case, the restrictive covenant clause was very broad, and it included the same language as Northeastern Brown, where, Brady, the head coach of the basketball team, couldn't talk to other institutions about employment without written consent. And he also had a non-recruit clause that he couldn't talk to recruits that he had been talking to while at Marist without written consent from the other institution that he had gone to. And so he did this at James Madison. He talked to previous recruits, and the court ruled in favor that he did breach his contract with Marist, but awarded no damages. In this specific case is an example of when a restricted covenant clause is too broad in a contract, there's not much that courts are going to do. And so for courts to rule in favor of these restricted covenants, these clauses need to be very narrow and specific. Generally, they need to be specific geographically and within a time span. So if a non-compete clause in a coaching contract is very specific and includes division rivals in the same conference teams in a certain time span, then it's much more likely to be upheld. For example, if Jim Harbaugh had a clause in his contract stating that if he is to breach contract with the University of Michigan, he's not allowed to coach at a Big Ten school for 2 years and within a 200-mile radius, that's very likely to be upheld in court, versus if it said, Mr. Harbaugh, if you breach your contract, you can't coach at any Power 5 school for 1 year. That's way too broad, and that starts to restrict his trade ability, and that goes into antitrust issues, and that's not going to be upheld in court, generally. And so a good example that I like from the corporate world is Nike v. McCarthy. And here McCarthy was the director of sales for Nike, and he left that job to be the VP at Reebok. And Nike had a 1-year non-compete clause in their contract with him that he obviously broke, and the courts ruled in favor here. And I like this example because this is the corporate equivalent of leaving a team for a division rival. Leaving Nike for Reebok, that is like leaving Alabama for Auburn. That is very specific. That's way too close of competition. And here again, you see the courts rule in favor of that non-compete clause. And so overall, these clauses of preventing coaches from leaving or preventing them from going to a team in the same division or conference, it's really trying to prevent the spread of vital information and to prevent a competitive disadvantage. And so it's trying to prevent coaches from giving a rival team vital information about the team's procedures, their policies, access to the recruits. And also in the corporate world, it's trying to prevent confidential information from being spread and from creating a disadvantage in the marketplace. And so overall, I do think that these non-compete clauses are way more practical if they include that the coach cannot go to his team in the same conference or division. It's trying to prevent vital information from being spread. And I think, as we've seen in court cases, it is very effective.